Our first speaker will be Dr. Mark Kuczcewski, but you're going to tell them that yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. I am Mark Kuczcewski from the Stritch School of Medicine at Loyola University, Chicago, where I am the chairman of the Department of Medical Education and direct the Bioethics Institute. And what I'm going to talk to you about in my 15 minutes is how this webpage to your left came to be, our story of how we came to actually say welcome to Dreamers as applicants. We do know that there have been some Dreamers that have been in medical schools, jury-rigged, sort of fit into policies for which they don't really fit, but we actually changed our admissions policy to welcome Dreamers and actually say the word welcome, and I want to tell you how that came to be. Basically, it was driven by a request. In May of 2011, an email came from another Jesuit university. Loyola is a Jesuit university, one of 26 Jesuit universities around the country. And a professor at another Jesuit university had sent an email to our university describing a student. And this email bounced around from various professors to professors till somebody thought, that Kuczcewski guy talks a lot about immigration, let's send it to him. And the email from the professor, a mathematics professor, described a student who I will call Clara, not her real name. And Clara had a 3.94 GPA, graduated from that university as a pre-med double major in biology and Spanish with a strong volunteer and service record. And the professor, and again, a mathematics professor, he's not coming from the soft side of things, described her as the best student he had ever had. And she was interested in medical school, and she was interested in trying out one of the Jesuit medical schools, Loyola. And he said, but she has one little problem we have to deal with. She is a dreamer. She was an undocumented immigrant by our legal definitions. And he thought that if there was any possibility of this happening, she would need a faculty navigator to help her through this system. And I looked at this description, and of course, like everybody, was awed by this description of the student and said, I wonder if we can accept her and what that would mean. And so I talked to my dean, and I was charged to do some research on this. And a typical Dreamer student, if you're here, you're probably fairly familiar with Dreamers, but just to sort of review very quickly, the name Dreamer comes from a piece of legislation that was introduced around 2002, but it has never passed through the legislature, called the DREAM Act, standing for Development, Relief, and Education of Alien Minors. And so, the reason it's important is it was the first time anybody kind of described the characteristics of a dreamer, what typically would be their eligibility for an act like that should it pass. These are people who are born outside the United States but brought to the U.S. as children. So they did not come here of their own volition, which theoretically should make it easier for people to find acceptance that they did not break the law themselves in any way. Typically at a young age, described as coming here as under the age of 16, and usually between the age of 16 and 30 would be the category that is typically carved out in this kind of legislation. And I've lived in the United States more than 5 years, although we're coming to understand from some recent data that 80% have lived here more than 10 years, and so they're here for a very long time. And so they are commonly bilingual, bicultural, and in every way are integrated into our communities. And as the description of Clara indicates, have gone to school here and sometimes even been university educated. And in the words of President Obama, they are Americans in every way but on paper. And so Clara interested Stritch for a number of reasons. Basically, some of them, the typical reasons that any great student interests a medical school, right? We're in the business of accepting great students and making physicians out of them. And so when you see a great student, you want to recruit them. You don't want to tell them to go away for arbitrary reasons. She had, and of course, there are additional things that came with Clara. She has personal qualities in which one has overcome extraordinary life circumstances and brings that to the table with her. I think most of us, we think about what it would be like to not have a social security number or authorization to work or to interact. In most of the pursuits of life would say, I don't know how I would do that. That sounds really difficult. And so somebody who's navigated those waters obviously is a person of have particular kinds of skills and motivation. And of course, she adds the value of diversity, that diversity always adds to any student body. And that's not something that's touchy-feely, that's something that's well established in the literature, that we serve our populations better by churning out a physician workforce that is diverse in all senses of that word. And she, as I say, she comes with a knowledge of a particular culture, additional language, and also we do have a large immigrant population in this country, and she comes with some firsthand knowledge of that particular experience, and so can serve those kinds of populations well. And so if we're interested in social justice, and the Jesuit University makes a very clear claim to be so interested, the social justice for our patients means incorporating diversity when we have that opportunity, because those benefits are established. People who share ethnic and cultural backgrounds with underserved populations produce more satisfaction among their patients in those communities, are more likely to return to those communities and serve them, and they're often underserved communities, so we tend to produce physicians who are able to help those communities at higher rates, and they become role models in those communities. And so the AAMC has taken a very strong stand on these as benefits of diversity. And of course, there's just the question of social justice for Clara. She has worked hard. She has played by the rules her whole life. She is an overachiever. And so to say to her, to turn her away and not utilize her talents seems unjust. I mean, social justice is about and integrating everybody into the life of the community to the full extent of their ability to participate. And so we would want to do that. However, at the time, now we're talking May 2011, Clara was simply out of luck. There's no law that says you couldn't take her into medical school and educate her, but the barriers I kept running into in terms of getting her to become a practicing physician were still considerable. In particular, because she was a dreamer at that time, she could not work with any kind of authorization in this country. The next stage of training after medical school is residency. And residents are employees of the health systems at which they're training. So one would have to be able to have a legal authorization to work. So we could not get her onto that training stage, would probably not be able to be licensed by the state that she was trying to practice in, because the state medical board, without that work authorization, would not license her. So we would be putting enormous amounts of resources into a student who could not go on to practice and achieve the mission of being a physician. And so at the time, we struggled with it, thinking about, do you take somebody like this on the hope that immigration reform passes while she's in school or so on? But there was no consensus to do something like that, for fear that we would pour lots of resources into this student and make a person who could not practice. And in calling around the country, I did a significant amount of research. There were stories that did not turn out well like that, where a school took an individual and educated them, and then had to leave the country to do residency training. And by our laws, if you're here more than a month without authorization, you cannot apply to come back for 10 years. So that essentially meant exile from the country, the only country she would have known really or could remember. And so we at the time, we tabled it. However, the good news is that in June 2012, President Obama made a speech and announced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. Those initials DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's an act of prosecutorial discretion by the executive branch, in which they simply say, register with us, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and we will agree to defer action. We will not try to deport you. And it's a 2-year grant of that, renewable at 2-year intervals. And the beauty of it, the music to our ears, was conferral of DACA status comes with a work authorization, an employment authorization document, often called a work permit. And that comes directly with the granting of DACA status, and they are then entitled to apply to the Social Security Administration for a Social Security number. And so it was an aha moment for us. They now would have everything they needed to go on to apply to a residency program and get licensed by the state medical board. And in fact, we confirmed with our state medical board in Illinois that there would be no barrier for them. And so at Stritch, we then decided to go very public with this. I mean, the initial temptation is to say, all right, good. let's tell Clara to apply, and she'll probably compete successfully for admission, and we'll be fine with that. There was still the barrier of financial aid for these students. They're ineligible for federally guaranteed student loans. And those of you familiar with medical school in this country knows that that's a significant part of most students' aid packages. So the thinking was, okay, maybe we could take one or two of these students that will really have to use school aid for them, and we'll just keep it quiet. But there was then the thought that triumphed with us ultimately, that would be unfair. If we were going to say we're going to welcome a student or two like this, we need to open it up for competition. Everybody needs to be able to, it couldn't just be Clara, who happened to have a professor who was a good advocate for her. We needed to extend this opportunity to everybody. And so we became the first medical school in the United States to actually change our policy to say to apply you could be a U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, or eligible for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And so, of course, the financial aid issue was still pending for us. But nevertheless, our dean, Linda Brubaker, who is a tremendous leader, said, no, we need to very publicly trumpet this and welcome all of these applicants and expect that people will rally to our cause to help them. And so by doing that, it created opportunities such as connections with the state infrastructure bank in Illinois called the Illinois Finance Authority, which makes loans for various projects that build state infrastructure, has now created a loan program for medical students or dental students of DACA status to serve in the state of Illinois in terms very similar to federally guaranteed student loans. And they can work off the interest by working in underserved communities in the state. So it was seen as an investment in the state's physician infrastructure. And so but if you don't publicly declare your intention, people like that can't rally to your cause and help you. Similarly, various alumni have stepped forward to assist with financial aid. And so this word of mouth, taking a leadership stance gives people a chance to follow. And that was more or less the important aspect of that. And so I will close by saying, we think that the benefits of this are going to be realized very soon by us. We are now past the October 15th date at which we started issuing admissions decisions to medical students who have applied. Things seem to be going very well. I am not empowered to speak for our admissions office, but my next panelist, New, heads a group called Pre-Health Dreamers, and recently they put on their website that one of their members had successfully competed for admission to the Loyola Stritch School of Medicine. So I have it on good sources that this is going well. And so I'll stop there and say that this will all come out in the next month's issue of the Hastings Center report. The same story will be told in some detail, and it will be available as free content online. So, thank you.